All right, today we're going to start a little bit out of order on purpose. So we're going to basically tackle the last two topics first in terms of the email that I sent you. So we're going to start off with what we call sort of front door, back door analysis, or simple financial feasibility analysis. Now this is something that is absolutely fundamental to understanding real estate development with respect to kind of looking at what your costs are, what in essence would you have to charge in rent for a property to be potentially financially successful. All right, and this is all integrated. Chase. This is all integrated in the sense of being able to understand how much you can borrow, but also how it ties in with what your acquisition cost and construction costs are, and then ultimately, once again, what sort of rent you can charge, or working from the other direction and saying, okay, here's what the market will bear in terms of a market rental rate, and then ultimately working from that direction to how much can I spend on the project, how much can I borrow on the project, that sort of thing. So there's basically two different ways to approach this, okay? And it's called sort of the front door, back door analysis. Now, in this particular case, what I've given you is a handout. It's the same on one side as it is on the other. This is basically for practice, as we're going to kind of work through a couple of different examples. And so what we start with, if you take a look at the front door procedure, here's where you start off. Let's just kind of walk through this before we do the calculations, just so we kind of get a sense of what we're dealing with. First of all of the green or light green cells are basically the given pieces of information, okay? And then the white cells are the ones that you've actually got to populate with some sort of a calculation. Now, in terms of the calculations, they're really not complicated, because if you look over on the far left, I give you what the calculations are, okay? Whether you add, whether you subtract, whether you multiply, whether you divide, that sort of thing. So it's really more of an exercise in you kind of just walking through the logic on this, you know, taking each of these, you know, variables and inputting them here, and then ultimately kind of, you know, what is it really telling us, all right? So this first piece, we start off with site acquisition cost. And we'll just work through an example. We'll get us started, assuming that we don't lose the, all right, so the very first thing, we sort of start off with the site acquisition. And here, what we're talking about is, in essence, land cost, okay? And anything to, in essence, transform that land into a buildable site, okay? Now, you might be saying, well, what if I'm just buying a building and I'm not actually, you know, buying the land and then building something? Then you can, in essence, skip over that step, skip over the construction cost, and just go directly to the total expected development cost, okay? But in this case, let's just say that we're going to buy some land, okay? Give me a dollar amount on the acquisition cost of the land. $3 million. $3 million, all right? Okay, so that's once again the cost of getting the land. Then to that, we're going to add on construction cost. Now here, you know, this may be something where we're estimating on a per square foot basis. We're going to some sort of construction calculator and getting some sort of an estimate of what that actual construction cost will be. Or maybe we've already got an estimate from a construction firm telling us what those construction costs are. All right, so let's just go with that. What are going to be our construction costs? Give me a dollar amount. Obviously, it's going to be greater than $3 million.
27 million.
27 million. All right. Okay, so now if we've got the site acquisition cost, we've got the construction cost, then we're just going to add those two together, and we're going to get 30 million. And so that's going to be our total expected development cost.
Can we write this on the sheet?
Yes, you can. That's the whole idea.
That's what I thought.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you've got 30 million in total expected development costs. So you've done your first calculation, you've added those two numbers together. All right. Then we go to the lender and we find out from the lender what sort of loan terms they're willing to give us. All right. So you tell me, what sort of loan to value ratio are they potentially willing to give us? All right. We've talked about, could be, maybe 60%, 70%, 80%, or,
75.
75. All right. So we have a loan to value ratio of 75%. Okay, 0.75. All right, so we simply multiply the 30 million times 0.75. And that gives us 22,500,000. In this case, that would be our permanent mortgage. Okay, everybody good with that? Okay, any questions up to this point? Okay, pretty straightforward. All right, now, this next piece is probably the only tricky piece on the whole sheet, okay, in terms of getting the mortgage constant, all right? So let's just kind of go ahead and put in what we've got here, mortgage constant. Oops. All right, so we're going to be putting in a number there that we're going to be multiplying by the permanent mortgage that is going to give us the cash required for debt service. Or in other words, our mortgage payment. Okay? All right. So, in order to get the mortgage constant, we need to know two things. We need to know the interest rate on the loan, and we need to know the loan term. Okay? All right, so let's just start off. Interest rate. Give me an interest rate.
7%.
7%. Okay. And loan term. How many years? 15 years. Okay, so we need those two pieces of information in order to calculate our mortgage constant. Okay? So what we're going to do, if you remember back to our sort of mortgage constant calculation, we're going to set this up as 12 payments per year. Clear everything out. And then we're going to put in 7% as our interest rate. We're going to put in 15 years as our term. And then we're going to put in $1 as the loan amount, or present value, and we're going to solve for payment. Okay? Now, what this boils down to is many years ago, before really using financial calculators, before using Excel, they would publish these books of tables where someone had gone through all the brain damage of doing all these calculations, and they wanted to come up with a way that would make it easy for loan officers to be able to calculate monthly payments and annual payments for loans. And so they came up with this whole thing of the mortgage constant. Well, what it basically boils down to is, as long as you've got the interest rate and you've got the term, and you're basically using $1 as your loan amount, then whatever you get here as your payment is, in essence, what we're calling the mortgage loan constant, or at least in this case would be the monthly mortgage constant. And then that number would be able to be taken and multiplied by any mortgage amount, and then that would give you, in essence, the mortgage payment. Does that make sense? Okay? So in other words, do we need to really do that step with a financial calculator? No, okay? But in order to kind of just sort of show the mechanics of what's really happening, it's probably the best way to be able to kind of demonstrate what really is taking place kind of behind the scenes. Okay, so we do this. Okay, and what you get is 0.0898828, so forth, so on. Well, that is the monthly.
I got 2 zeros.
Do I not put 2 zeros? Oh, no. 2 zeros. That is our monthly mortgage constant. We need to make that our annual mortgage constant. So in other words, we're simply going to take that, multiply it by 12. Okay? And so what you end up with when you do that is 107859, etc. Okay? So that now is going to be the number we're going to use as our mortgage constant. So we can put that in over here. 0.1078599393. Now this is one time where it really does make sense to go ahead and carry the decimals out, okay? Because it will have an impact on the actual dollar amount of the payment. Yes?
Is there any specific reason why we didn't just do one payment per year? Or did it mess it up?
Yes, because one payment per year is not going to be the same as 12 payments per year because of compounding. Okay? Well, let's just do it, just to sort of show the difference. Okay? So the difference would be, the question Justin was asking, well, what if we did this like one payment per year? The steps are going to be the same, it's just your answer is going to be different.
Yeah, just because I thought, oh, if you're multiplying 12 payments.
Yeah, it's not going to be the same because of the compounding that occurs. So let's just see what it ends up being. Okay, you see it's slightly different. 0.10979465. Now you're seeing it's slightly higher. Actually, this is a good little sort of discussion point. Whoops. This is not highlighting. Oh, okay. You can see it's different as we get to kind of the third decimal place. All right? And it's higher if it were annual than what if it were monthly. Okay, there's a reason for that. All right? Think about if you're making monthly mortgage payments, you're really paying off the loan sooner. Because if you remember, all of this assumes the payments are occurring at the end of the period, end of the month or end of the year. So with the monthly mortgage, your first payment occurs 1 month from today, correct? But with the annual payment, your first payment doesn't occur until 1 year from now, okay? Meaning you're accumulating, in essence, more interest charges over the course of that first 12 months that you're not accumulating with the monthly payments because those are happening much quicker. Does that make sense? So that's the reason why that with the annual payments, you're going to see it's slightly higher because it's really attributed to the extra interest that you are basically not paying over the course of the year, that you are paying obviously each month with the monthly payments. Make sense?
Yes, so anytime we're using an amortized or any type of mortgage, we're always going to put 12.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there are a few rare exceptions, and sometimes, you know, we may get sloppy with it, but for the most part, almost all mortgages are going to make the assumption they're monthly payments.
All right.
Okay, so So this is, once again, we've already written the number up here for our mortgage constant. Now we do the math of simply multiplying that. Okay. Cleared it out, so I'm going to have to get that real quick. Times 22,500. Okay. So I'm getting $2,426,836.33. And that's just, and if you're getting a number that's slightly different than that, it's simply because maybe you rounded, okay? All I did to get that number was I went back, re-entered this information up here, multiply it by 12, and then simply multiply that number directly by the 22,500,000, and that's what I end up with. Okay, make sense? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that gives us our basically cash required for debt service, or once again, this would be the equivalent of our annual debt service. Okay? All right. So far, so good. Okay? All right. So once we've got that, then we multiply that by our lender required debt service coverage ratio. Okay? Now, if you remember, the debt service coverage ratio is equal to the net operating income divided by the annual debt service. And in our discussions, the whole point of this is the lender wants to ensure that they're going to be paid, so they want some sort of a cushion above and beyond whatever that payment is relative to the income the property is generating, okay? So, in this case, what we know is we know our annual debt service, which in this case is going to be this $2,426,836. What we don't know is NOI, and we're going to have to be given the debt service coverage ratio by the lender. So most lenders are going to tell you what that is up front, and they're going to say, okay, for this kind of project, with this sort of conditions and so forth, our debt service coverage ratio is what? Okay, give me a number.
1.2.
1.2. So that would mean a 20% cushion for the debt relative to the income. So if we were to put in 1.2 as our debt service coverage ratio, that's going to give us $2,912,203.59 or 60 cents rounded. Okay? And so once again, we can pop that in here if we want to, not if we need to, but just to sort of finish out that little piece. Okay? And so what this, obviously this number represents, as you take a look at the sheet, is our required net operating income. All right? Oops. Okay? Everybody good? So does everybody understand kind of the logic of what we're doing? Okay? But once again, we're kind of working backwards in this case. We're not working backwards, we're working sort of forwards in this case, of sort of saying, all right, here's how much we're paying for the site, here's our construction cost, here's our total expected development cost, loan-to-value ratio, get our permanent mortgage, here's basically what we need for annual debt service, and then here is what we need at a minimum of net operating income in order to satisfy all these conditions, okay? Everything basically is conditional on everything that precedes it, all right?
And real quick, the 1.2, we just made that number up, right?
Right, that's, once again, that's a given, it's in green, okay? All right, so the lender is going to provide you with that. All right, moving forward. All right, then we're going to add in sort of estimated operating expenses. And these are going to be the expenses that we say that are not passed through to the tenants, meaning that we, as the owner or investor of the property, have to pay for. Because with operating expenses, sometimes you have a choice as to what operating expenses you as the property owner want to pay, what operating expenses that you want to pass on to the tenant, okay? Because you can have a situation of where you have one extreme, which is kind of an absolute gross lease, which would be, in essence, an all bills paid lease, that you as the property owner are paying all of the operating expenses on behalf of the tenant. The tenant just simply writes you one check, everything is covered, and you sort of, walk away and you're done. And probably one of the best simple examples of that is like renting a dorm room, okay? For the most part, and I don't know, maybe not as much as it used to be, but it used to be the case, you rent a dorm room, it takes care of your electricity, takes care of a local phone bill, takes care of cable, takes care of internet, takes care of water, takes care of sewer, takes care of trash, but all one single payment, as opposed to, in essence, obviously, having to single those bills out, okay? Now, on the other extreme would be what I would refer to as like an absolute triple net lease, where the tenant is going to be responsible for everything, and the property owner is responsible for nothing. This is the ultimate sort of mailbox money scenario, where you as the property owner, you own the property, you own it hopefully free and clear, but your tenant, they take care of everything. If a window gets broken, they pay for it, they fix it, they repair it. If the roof needs to be replaced, they replace it. The parking lot needs to be resurfaced, they resurface it. If literally anything happens to that property, any sort of maintenance, any sort of repairs, any sort of utilities, property taxes, insurance, everything is covered by the tenant in an absolute triple net lease, okay? And the reason for that is because the kind of investors that usually chase after those sort of absolute triple net leases are retirees, okay? That a retiree, let's assume that you're somebody, you spend your whole life working, whatever, and you've got a big pocket of money that you want to throw into some sort of investment, so you take $10 million of your savings, and in essence, you buy a local Walgreens or CVS store, okay? But all you're really buying, you're buying the real estate, yeah, you're buying the building, but you're not buying the business. But what happens is CVS, Walgreens, simply every single month will send you a check for basically a lease, okay, on that property. And you, as the property owner, really never probably even see the property. Okay, you don't worry about the property because you know everything is going to be taken care of for the next 25 years by CVS or Walgreens, and you're just sitting back collecting checks every month. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, those are the two extremes. Okay, of gross lease versus an absolute triple net lease. So in this case, and most leases probably fall somewhere in between those two. But in this case, what we're saying is, what are the operating expenses that are not going to be passed through to the tenants, meaning we as the property owner are going to be financially responsible for them, okay, and not necessarily reimbursed, okay? So, dollar amount for those. Just pull something out of the air.
Not a percentage?
No, we can do a percentage. We can also do it just as a dollar amount.
It would be 30% of the.
Well, but see, that wouldn't necessarily be 30% of NOI.
30% of the construction cost plus outside acquisitions cost.
Not necessarily. Go ahead.
So you're doing this as a gross lease? Then?
We're doing this as we can make the choice, actually. Because if it were a gross lease, the number here is going to be really big.
Okay.
Okay? If it's an absolute triple net lease, this number could be zero. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But then.
Okay? So, but most leases are probably going to be, once again, somewhere in the middle. All right? So I'm just going to pull a number out of the air just to keep it simple, $1 million. All right?
This is per year?
Per year. All right? There's nothing magical or mystical about that number. I just pulled $1 million out of the air, okay? All right, so we add that to our required net operating income, and then that in essence is going to give us our effective gross income. Of $3,912,203.60. Okay? Pretty much the only reason I chose $1 million is I knew it would add up easy. Okay? All right. Now, okay, so we've got that. Then we need to divide that by our expected occupancy rate for the property. Okay, so give me an occupancy rate.
We divide by the occupancy?
Because we're working sort of backwards.
75%.
That's kind of a low occupancy. We'll
95.
use it. We'll use it. Okay, no, it's okay. It's okay. 75%. Just hurts my heart. I want to get property going. 75%. Okay, 75% occupancy rate. That's going to give us our required gross revenue. All right, so let's do that. It's going to be divided by. So 59 or 52, 16, 271, 46. Okay. So that is our annual gross revenue, or the equivalent of potential gross income. All right. And so we divide that by the leasable square feet. And then that is going to give us the rent required per square foot per year. Okay? All right, so how many square feet do we have in this property? This would be, now once again, okay, that's also another quick little teachable lesson. What is the difference between leasable square feet and total square feet?
Total square feet is the box.
Okay, total square feet is in essence the box, the site as a whole, okay? And in terms of the building footprint, okay? And then in this case, the leasable square feet can be, in one sense, you know, what is available to be occupied. But this is where, this is not an absolute sometimes calculation. Like for example, if you were leasing out just this room, you would measure, for leasable square feet, you would measure from that wall to that wall, that wall to that wall, and that would be the leasable square feet. But if you were leasing the whole floor, it might be, once again, the back wall of the building to the front wall of the building, and then everything inside, and which may be a little bit more because you've got obviously the demising walls, okay? And so this is where it can get interesting and kind of tricky as to what you're really referring to. And some property owners go out of their way, in some cases, to either try to maximize or try to minimize the square footage actually quoted as leasable square feet. Because, like for example, if you say that the rent is $20 per square foot of leasable space, that's very different than $20 a square foot of total space, or in other words, total building area. Do you follow me? Okay. So, well, and we'll come back to that in just a second. Okay, Chase, you had a question.
So, is leasable square footage including common areas?
Once again, depends.
Right.
In some properties, what they will do is they will carve out those common areas, and then they will do kind of a load factor of saying, okay, you are leasing 10% of the total building area, or total, total building area that's the leasable space, therefore you're gonna pay for 10% of the common space. But in some cases, they maybe come up with some other sort of arrangement where you may be leasing 10% of the total building space, but then they say, we're just gonna charge you a common area maintenance fee, a common area charge based on some other metric, and in essence get more than really they should be getting for those common area spaces, but it's a way to ultimately inflate the dollar revenue that they're receiving for the building, okay? And all of those in many cases can be, you know, negotiated depending on the size of the tenant, the strength of the tenant, and so forth. Because like, for example, you know, there's something, you know, simple like a shopping mall that, you know, it's obviously quite common that the anchor stores pay less per square foot than the smaller sort of inline tenants, okay? And the reason for that is you really want the anchor store there because theoretically, they're the ones that draw the traffic to the store, so therefore you're gonna charge them a higher rate, a lower rate because you really want them there, and then the other folks are sort of dependent upon them being there. But, you know, I think things have changed quite a bit to where that's not always the case. Because you think about like something that's a relatively smaller tenant, a perfect example would be like an Apple store, okay? An Apple store, I would not categorize in any way, shape, form, or fashion as an anchor tenant, you know, because they don't have the square footage within the mall as an anchor tenant. They're just an inline tenant like, you know, a whole variety of other, you know, sort of inline tenants. So, but yet, and more than likely, now they may choose to have a premium space within a mall and maybe pay more for that, but they're probably paying much more per square foot than obviously a traditional sort of department store would be within the mall. Okay?
This is just an argument because I understand that this is actually true. But how is that statement true when most anchor tenants actually own their own property?
Some do, some don't.
Correct, most.
Okay.
But how is that true when most of them actually own their own properties?
Well, even then, it may be that whenever the mall was developed, that they were given the pad site at a discount relative to basically the remainder of the mall.
Okay.
Because they want them there.
And they signed an early lease
Right.
and all that jazz.
In many cases, they probably did ground leases, so they may not own the actual physical ground underneath their box. They may have like a 30-year, 40-year, 50-year ground lease, so that way that, once again, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, that physical box will then revert to whoever the owner is of the land. And this is quite common with a lot of different types of developments, especially whenever you're doing large-scale land assembly for things like shopping centers, airports, even universities, okay? It's quite common, like at a university, whether it's a private university or a state university, to have situations of where the university says, hey, we've got all this land, and what we want to do, in essence, is allow developers to come in and build a dorm, or build a parking garage, or whatever, and then do a long-term ground lease with the university where, in essence, they get to collect whatever revenues they can off of, let's say, the parking garage or off of the dorm, but then in 30 years' time, those facilities revert back to the university, and then they get to start collecting the revenue off of them, you know, at that later date.
I think that just happened with Rockefeller Center.
It's very, once again, very, very common that you have these, it's not something that many of us in our day-to-day existence, you know, sort of probably deal with as much, but like if you've ever, you know, had like a lake lot of times like lakefront property or waterfront property, in a lot of cases, sometimes depending on the local government, they will restrict ownership of those properties, so therefore they're long-term leases, okay? Actually, one of the condos that I owned in Austin, Texas many years ago, it was on like a 50-year ground lease, but it was a renewable ground lease, so that once again, every 50 years, they simply just had to pony up a different price based on what the value of the land was relative to that particular time period. Yep.
Who's paying the rent on the property that they're ground leasing? You know what I mean? So like, if Nova does a ground lease and then someone develops it, isn't Nova occupying that building?
Not necessarily. It's a question of how it's structured. Like, for example, it could be that you don't, like, it's like a dorm. And I have no idea how the dorms here are done specifically, but I know in Texas, whenever we did these, quite commonly, what would happen is you would have, the university would own the land, the university would say, okay, developer, come in, get the financing, build the facility on our land. You basically maybe pay us $1 a year to lease that land from us, okay? And then in turn, you collect whatever revenues, you run the dorm or apartment building or whatever for that 30-year period, collect all the revenue you can, maintain the property to a certain level, you know, with annual inspections, and then at the end of 30 years, that property reverts to the university, and at that point, the university takes control of the asset and starts managing it, or decides whether it's worth just tearing down and starting fresh again.
That's not a real ground lease. That's just like a mechanism that they're using to like get the property back. Because if you're leasing it for $1,
it's still a real, well, okay, now, a real ground lease, that is a real ground lease. It's just that in terms of, there's no real financial return in the short term, you're deferring everything into the future.
yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, that you're sort of saying, okay, well, they should be paying some sort of market-based rent now on the land, you know, each month or whatever to the university. And it can be structured that way. There's nothing that says it can't be structured that way. It's just that in many instances, they're structured this other way simply because it allows the university to achieve something without having to maybe put forth any real additional cost. If it's something, and it makes it really attractive to a developer to come in and actually pursue that.
So is the developer just bringing money?
Well, money in the construction and overseeing the construction process, getting it and managed and so forth. So, I mean, it can be structured literally in an infinite number of ways. I mean, but like a parking garage is another, you know, sort of case in point. You know, this is a fully automated parking garage. You know, and I know that at one point it was a public-private partnership between the university and the county and so forth. But, you know, I have seen them at other universities where, you know, once again, the developer came in, built the parking garage, you know, automated it, and then just simply collected all of the revenue off that parking garage for like 25 years to be specific. And then at the end of the 25 years, then it became owned by the university. So the expectation would be the developer comes in, builds, spends whatever's necessary, and hopefully can recoup their investment and get the rate of return that they want over that 25-year period. And then after that, you know, gone. Okay? All right. That was a very long way to get back to. Okay. Leasable square feet. Okay. So in this case, all we're talking about here is what is the space that actually is going to be rented out on an annual basis. So let's just pop in a number. A $5 million property. I don't know. Let's go with something simple. This is probably not. Hello. Now all of a sudden changes. Let's go to like 15,000 square feet. Okay. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah, it's too high. Let's move the decimal place over one more. 150,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. $34.78 rounded. And that would be per square foot per year. Okay? Now, so in this case, all this is telling us is this is what we would need to be charging for rent and achieving that rent for this property of that size. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in this case, What we could do is also kind of, sort of say, well, what if in the market, the rental rate that we have per year is telling us that for this kind of property, this size of property, that the going market rental rate is 25 bucks a square foot, per square foot per year, okay? Then if the market says it's 25, and we're saying that we need to get 34, will this project be feasible, yes or no? No. But what if the market rent for comparable property is at $40 a square foot per year? Then all of a sudden we look at this, oh, we only need to get $34 to be successful. Sure, we can do basically, the project makes sense. But now the other thing, and the part that you sort of tripped us up with, is the fact that it's only 75% occupied, okay? And that puts a big cushion in there, in terms of, that quite frankly, if we could raise that occupancy, let's say to 90 or 95%, what's that gonna do to us? Let's just take a look. Let's just say we go to 90% occupancy. That would mean we would end up with 4,346,892, and then if our square footage stays constant at 150,000, 28.98. So in other words, with a higher occupancy level, which makes obviously logical sense, higher occupancy would mean that we would only need to get a lower dollar amount of rent. Because you stuck us with this horrific, low occupancy of 75%, then that means we've got to get more rent per square foot up front, knowing that that's going to be the case. Whereas if we actually can push it up to something a bit more reasonable, like 90%, we only have to get that per square foot per year, okay? Yep.
So,
What's like a realistic number as far as per square foot basis? Is it completely?
No, it's all based on the market rent. Because,
It could range from.
oh yeah, but well, think about it like this. Okay, you've got industrial property, which is probably the cheapest property of all to be able to rent. And that may rent for, $5, $10, $15 a square foot per year, depending on the quality, depending on the location, depending, a whole number of things. You're not gonna, I don't want to say that. I was gonna say, you're not gonna get rich off of industrial, but that's not true. It's a lower cost basis sort of property, because think about what industrial property really is. It's basically a concrete slab, 4 walls and a roof, usually no air conditioning, no finish out, no nothing, in terms of a bare basic industrial property. It was kind of like the ultimate sort of, in one sense, industrial property that actually does get a lot of rent, but doesn't have to have a whole lot of finish out because it may not be climate controlled, be like self-storage or external self-storage. I'm talking about the ones with just garage door, open air, no air conditioning, not enclosed and climate controlled. If you have the climate controlled, then that's going to be more, per square foot.
So what's the property that's the biggest bang for the buck?
Hotel?
It's not necessarily its biggest bang for the buck.
it's relative.
It's relative depending on the market, because what can happen is, like for example, even with industrial, that if there is a significant undersupply of industrial property in a particular geographic region, and there are significant barriers to actually building those industrial properties, because the local governments have all kind of said, we don't want industrial properties within our corporate city limits for whatever reasons, so we've zoned them out of the possibility of being built. Then all of a sudden you have constricted the supply of industrial property, and if the demand keeps escalating, then at some point that industrial property could be extremely valuable because it's the only one there to service that particular location. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm saying, that it's not that one is an absolute home run every single time. It's all, that's where the local market conditions have all the influence of what can be built, What are they encouraging to be built? What are they, in essence, maybe discouraging from being built? Okay? Because local governments, I don't want to turn this into a whole land use discussion, but I think, you know, the question is a really important one. I'll give a quick mini sort of land use thing.
And it stems from, like, we had a discussion with Ben, me, and Chase over at Styles, and he basically just like outlined one of the deals that he did in retail. And I've been put off by retail by countless people because, you know, the retail space is changing, et cetera, et cetera. But it was like an amazing deal where you do one deal and it's just like, you're good, you know what I mean? And so,
Well, assuming that all the tenants are good quality tenants, are going to be able to survive, that that it's a proper mix of tenants.
But he had like 8 tenants though, as
Right.
opposed to the super popular
Right.
multifamily with 300 tenants. And you know, for us at a young age, we want a niche.
Right.
So like we don't want to be chasing industrial, office,
Right.
you know, everything. And then for us, we're trying to figure out, okay, so you know, where can we put all of our attention so that in 3 years or 5 years, like the fruits of our labor will be there instead of us getting $3 a square foot for, you know, industrial
Right.
or whatever.
No, I understand, and once again, it's an excellent question, and there is not an absolute answer,
Yeah, I know.
you know, because while that retail property, I have no idea about where it is, what it is, but while that property may lease out initially and initially be ridiculously successful, what then potentially precludes a virtually identical property from being built across the street and then potentially stealing your tenants within a few years and putting it in direct competition, and there's not really room in the market for both to exist, and so, you know, it ends up, you know, basically deflating, but, you know, the value. So, that's what I'm saying, you know, nothing, unless, you know, if you're in such a growth-controlled, growth-restricted area where, you know, everything is built out, pretty much most everything is at maximum capacity, then yeah, you're probably not gonna have a whole lot to worry about. But if you're in an area where there's still plenty of opportunity for competing projects to be located there, then, you know, within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the whole dynamic changes. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so the example that I was going to talk about, just real briefly, kind of, you know, as it relates to this whole thing of kind of the government influencing basically values and kind of the underlying value of a property. Just think, let's say that you've got a city, almost like a tic-tac-toe grid. So you've got basically 9 different areas within the city. You take like a map of the city, you make this 9 different grids, 9 different zones within that city. And let's say that the center one is the central business district, okay? And that is the area that is going to be the most densely populated. It's going to already have a lot of growth associated with it. All the infrastructure is there in place in terms of roads, water, sewer systems, electricity. All the city services are all there and they're in existence, okay? And then, you know, over time, you know, you've had, you know, let's say these other areas, you know, we're just going to label them A, B, C, D, so forth, just so we can refer to them, have been built out or not, depending on their characteristics and circumstances. And so let's just say the most popular areas to be developed have been basically E and F over time, all right? And the infrastructure has been put into those city, or those parts of the city, and so forth. But all of a sudden, a developer acquires a bunch of land up in quadrant A, okay? And in quadrant A, it's pristine land, okay? Maybe it was a family farm, ranch, whatever. No infrastructure in terms of water, sewer capacity, roads, schools, nothing, okay? It's just raw land, all right? Well, the city may have an issue that maybe in one of these other areas that has been already kind of, you know, developed, maybe it's not fully developed, but the infrastructure is there. And so they may say, we want to offer incentives, basically, for folks to develop here and here, basically all throughout, basically those 3 quadrants, all right? And in other words, we want to offer basically tax rebates. We want to offer, you know, all kinds of maybe no permitting fees and a whole number of other things that maybe they could do. But yet, if somebody wants to develop up here, maybe in this whole sector, they may say, no, we want to charge massive development impact fees, okay? And those development impact fees, theoretically, should go toward putting in roads, water, sewer lines, you know, other physical, you know, infrastructure associated with the community. So, in one sense, what the city has done, if they make these massive enough, it'll do what? Deter development from actually taking place, okay? Whereas by offering incentives to actually develop or redevelop within this area, you drive the development to these areas. Does that make sense? And then maybe if you do nothing, maybe with this group down here for whatever reason, you know, that there are no incentives, no fees, then, you know, it's kind of a neutral thing, but maybe, you know, there's nothing really special about this particular area that makes it anyone want to develop it. You follow what I'm saying? Now, the reason I'm talking about this, and sort of the question that you asked, the local government has a tremendous amount of power and influence over how local land gets used and what uses can be used or can happen there, or whether they choose to exclude them from those particular areas. Does that make sense? You know, they could say, we don't want any industrial property anywhere in our entire city, so therefore we're going to exclude it. Or we're going to, if we want to build something in our city, we're going to place such a high development impact fee on that particular product, whatever it is, that it simply is not financially viable. Does that make sense? And so where this would have impact in our model is pretty much up here at the top. In terms of the site acquisition cost and getting the site ready for operation, that if all of a sudden you have all those extra fees and charges, that's going to influence this, and influence it dramatically. Okay, potentially. Okay, makes sense? Okay, moving forward. All right, so any questions about that? We good? Yep, okay, moving forward. All right, let's flip the script. The backdoor approach, okay? Basically, the reverse of what we just did, okay? So let's just kind of work through it. We can kind of go through it maybe a little bit quicker. So let's say we're going to start off with total leasable square feet, and we don't have to use the same numbers, but we'll just sort of, we can if we want to.
Do we get to keep these?
What?
These sheets?
Yes. Okay. So total leasable square feet, let's say, just since we used it in the previous example, we'll go ahead and use it here just for fun. 150,000 square feet, all right? Then we multiply that by the expected rent per square foot per year, all right? So here's where now you would go out and you would look at, okay, what is the market telling us that the rent would be for a property that we want to build of that particular type. So let's just say that our expected rent per square foot that we could find out in the market is 30 bucks. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is simply do basically the math. Taking 150,000 square feet times 30 bucks a square foot. All right? Which is simply going to be our projected potential gross income. Okay? Everybody good? So it's working backwards. Then we're going to take and we're going to multiply that by our occupancy rate. Now, the occupancy rate that we're going to use here is, once again, hopefully tied to this particular property type, okay, within this particular market. Does that make sense? All right? or what we expect our property to be able to get. So give me a percentage here.
95.
We'll go with 90. Yeah, we'll go with 95, what the heck. All right, 95%. I like optimism. Okay. All right, so that is going to represent, in essence, our effective gross income. All right, and once we've got that, then we're simply going to subtract out our expected total operating expenses. And so here, once again, I'm just going to use $1 million just because it's an easy number. All right, so here we're subtracting it out, and that's going to give us our expected net operating income, in this case of $3,275,000. Okay, everybody still with me? All right. Okay, once we've got that, then we do a series of little calculations. We divide by our debt service coverage ratio. In this case, if we want to be consistent with what we did previously, we said 1.2, so we'll go ahead and use that. All right, then right after that, we can divide by our annual mortgage constant, and then divide by our maximum loan-to-value ratio. Okay, well, our loan-to-value ratio that we used up above was 75%. Okay, and if we end up getting the same loan terms that we used in the example above, okay, which was what, 7% for 15 years? Then we already know what our mortgage constant is. We can kind of pull that down, which was point.
So we're using 7% interest?
Yep. We're going to do the same thing, 7%, 15 years, so we'll just save some time. Yeah, no, I just want to put it in myself. All right, so I don't screw it up, hopefully. Okay, so our mortgage constant, 107,859,393. Okay, we do all of that, and that gets us down to basically the maximum supportable total project cost. Okay. So what you can do is you don't really stop in the middle of this calculation. You just start with 3275 divided by 1.2 divided by 0.107859393 divided by 0.75, and so you end up with $33,737,338.84. Okay? So all I was doing is just basically keeping you from having to write down a bunch of additional numbers, because the intervening numbers here are not really important. It's ultimately just go ahead and apply those numbers to come up with basically what you're really searching for, which would be the project cost. All right? Then, if you want to continue from there, because that may be all you're really concerned with is, all right, what is the maximum amount I can pay for this project, and just stop there? Or, if you want to separate out then the construction and the land cost, then you could say, okay, let's subtract out our expected construction cost. And let's say that we're building basically the same project that we had built up here. So we've got 27 million. as our expected construction cost for this property. Then, when we do the math, then that means we could actually spend a lot more on the acquisition cost of the land. Than we did in the previous example. Does that make sense? Okay. You see the value in these two approaches of terms, and once again, this is probably the most fundamental set of calculations any developer is going to do. It's also kind of, well, I like what we refer to as kind of a back of the envelope sort of analysis for a property. This, and it's called simple financial feasibility analysis for a reason, because you're not necessarily using precise numbers that are going to carry out for many years. You're sort of saying, at this moment in time, what do I expect my construction cost to be? What do I expect my net operating income to be? What do I expect my total operating expenses? And the assumption is here, all of those numbers are going to be static, meaning they're going to stay the same. Because I think, any of us, if you look at this over time and you develop like a 10-year sort of projection, then you're going to sort of say, okay, you're going to make assumptions for each of those to adjust up or down over time. In other words, rents may go up, expenses may go down, expenses may go up, rents may go, whatever happens, to be able to do maybe a more accurate or precise sort of model. But this at least gets you in the ballpark of, okay, does this thing make any sense at all? Okay? And you can do this with big projects, small projects, and it's pretty simple little analysis. Okay? Any questions? Okay, all good? Okay, take a quick break. 5-minute break. And we'll come back and do the other 8 little topics, which should not take very long.
So as far as this sheet,
Yes.
School.
Yes.
I had a question, Dr. Ford, a little off topic, as far as, like, I don't know the specific term of it, it's like depreciation or something, but like, if you buy a piece of property through a business, it's like a 5-year where you can deduct 70%. How is that like work structurally?
Okay. There's a difference between the depreciable building value, like for example, yeah, if you buy an operating business, you're going to have, in many cases, like business fixtures that may be in place within that building that have a certain life of their own. So like equipment or furniture or whatever, and so those may have, and do, have a unique sort of depreciation term that is separate from the actual building or the real estate. The building and the real estate, if it's a commercial building, it's going to be a 39-year depreciable life. If it's residential, 27.5-year depreciable life. Okay, now those are set by the IRS. That's the only significance of those. And the same sort of thing is true with the individual component pieces within the building that, depending on the kind of equipment, it may have a 5-year depreciable life, it may have a 7-year depreciable life, it may have a 3-year depreciable life, whatever it is. And normally the way those work is, without getting into all the nitty-gritty detail, but like something that has, let's say, a 5-year depreciable life, the way the IRS lets you do it is in the first year of the asset's life, you technically have what's called mid-year, you apply what's called a mid-year convention, meaning the assumption is it's placed into service middle of the year, regardless of whether you buy it at the beginning of the year, end of the year, middle of the year, anytime during the year, mid-year, is you get half a year worth of depreciation in that first year, but then in the last year, you sort of get to tack on a half a year. Okay, does that make sense? So in other words, it's really over 6 years, but you get half a year in the first year, half a year in the 6th year, and then everything else, sort of.
And is that the purchase price, right?
I'm sorry?
Is it at the purchase price?
Well, no.
70%.
It could be of the original acquisition price of that piece of equipment. It could also be, an independent valuation of what that equipment is worth in today's dollars. Because, for example, let's say that you buy a building that has equipment in it that is maybe 10 years old.
What if we're not talking about equipment, we're just talking like, if your business say you have, just say you have a real estate business and you purchase a commercial piece of property,
Mhm.
just basically taking, just taking the, like, the tax deduction from that, I don't know, I
Well,
was,
the business itself is not gonna be depreciable.
no, but the real estate.
Oh, the real estate, yes. If you're talking about just the actual physical bricks and
I'm
sticks,
talking about the real estate.
okay, the bricks and sticks then would be 39 years.
Of the real estate.
Right.
Of the value.
Of the value. Over, if it 1/39th, you get to write off each year.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's a decent amount.
And once again, let's not make sure we're not confusing things. I'm not talking about furniture, I'm not talking about computers, I'm not talking about, you know, I'm talking about the physical bricks and sticks.
Can't you
You know,
do
like a
cost
computer,
segregation?
you can write off over like 2 or 3 years, you know?
So you're talking about the actual stuff that's in that building?
Yeah, that's separate.
That's like a 5-year, that's
What
what the
the-
5-year thing.
Right,
is.
yeah, depending on what items are, you know, pieces of equipment, furniture, furnishings, things like that, may have a 3-year depreciable life, 5-year depreciable life, 7-year, depending on what they are.
Can't you do cost segregation and expedite the, for like 5 years?
Yeah,
I really wanna know why you bought your commercial property. I know it's kinda switch up, but
Stop asking questions, man.
how you decided to buy your commercial property instead of multi?
I bought them because I
So
could,
nosy.
I bought them at below replacement cost.
Like how, so.
Because they were, in my specific case, several of the properties I bought were from a family trust where someone had died. And basically they were tired of managing the trust, they wanted to liquidate the properties. I saw a good deal, I bought them.
What were you doing prior to that? What were you doing prior to your first deal?
Working on this first year.
Working, teaching, consulting,
So like your experience was still in real estate, like.
yeah,
So it was easy for you to spot the opportunity,
yeah.
like back of the napkin type deal?
Pretty much, because I mean, when you buy something, let's say for $100,000 and you know that it would cost you $300,000 or $400,000 to replace it, it's probably worth buying. Even if it has some problems.
Is that based on like market construction costs and?
Right.
It's not like a rule of thumb?
I mean, you just have to kind of, you would have to have a fairly decent sense of, okay, how does this acquisition price relate? I mean, it's the same reason that I mean, it's not that really different for commercial properties than it is for residential properties. If you're talking about like flipping homes, you know, you're trying to buy an undervalued home because of some weird, quirky circumstance. Somebody got divorced, somebody died, somebody, you know, lost their job, somebody, you know, whatever, some horrible circumstance that you are able to sort of take on possession of that property because of their situation. And you're potentially buying it at below replacement cost. You can potentially put money into it. Hopefully, the money that you put into it has a much more positive impact than just the dollars that you're putting into it, because you're converting it from a non-productive asset into a productive asset, or a much more productive asset. But you're going from it being non-occupiable to being either occupiable or occupiable at a much higher quality.
Are you underwriting it all different ways, like, one of what replacement cost, the other one is income analysis, et cetera, et cetera? 'Cause I went to a property yesterday and it was like literally like a 9.5 cap, but it was destroyed, you know, and the guy's like, and he doesn't really wanna budge on it. But I mean, like, it makes sense financially, so it's like, how do you decide on whether you wanna move forward on something? It needs a lot of work, so obviously I wouldn't go about it, but at the same time.
Once again, I mean, just, this is gonna really get you to that. I mean, it's the same thing. You're basically gonna say, I know how much I can rent it out for at the end of the day, once it's completely rehabbed. And so you're gonna back into, well, how much basically could you afford to pay for it up front?
Is it necessary to drag this out years?
Only if you believe the number to be unstable, or it's not stabilized and alive. I mean, this makes the assumption it's stabilized and alive, but if you're thinking that maybe for whatever reason it's not, it's going to escalate over time because maybe it's in a horrible area of town, okay? And over time, that horrible area of town becomes less horrible. because of renovation, redevelopment, and so forth.
So at that point, you wouldn't need to calculate that though, because it's a win.
Well, it's a win. But what if you buy into a horrible area, it only gets worse? Because that happens too.
By that,
Does it though that often?
okay.
Wait, what was the question? Does what happen often?
Like, I haven't really seen a situation where you're buying a property for a good price and it makes a lot of sense, and then like once you fix it up and it's working, then it goes down in value.
Well, because you have maybe such a horrible set of surroundings that no one wants to lease it. And the other properties, you know, I mean, it makes it just completely undesirable to be there long term because maybe you have completely
It's not really in the same.
entrenched owners or entrenched renters or entrenched, you know, circumstances that preclude it from ever really being.
Would you dispute that there's always a tenant for the property? Because like I've been in some.
Well, there's always a tenant, but are they willing to pay what you need them to pay to make it financially viable? You know, there's a difference.
Because like I've been working on another one. It's like a retail shop that is disgusting. Like it's awful. Like it's basically run down. You know, it looks like just orange stucco across the whole thing. And I've had issues kind of getting them on board, but not really knowing how to underwrite it other than, you know, what the possible rents could be. You know, so I'm gonna try and create like a little spreadsheet using this so I can easily just.
That would be a good thing. Or I can just send you that one.
You know what? I'll charge you for it.
Okay. All right, so we got a handful of other things we need to do, specifically 8 more sort of topics or calculations to get through.
Don't threaten me like that.
I know. We have 2 hours to do it. So, all right. Some of these are super simple, so that's okay. That's why I started with the more involved stuff first to come back to basically the easier stuff. Okay, so one of the first calculations, and all this is pretty much in your book with respect to the calculations. This first one, the debt yield. Okay, what you've got here, the debt yield is equal to what? Net operating income divided by what?
Total debt.
Okay, or loan amount. Okay. Now, why do you think this number would be of any value to a lender? I mean, you know, it's somewhat similar to the debt service coverage ratio, but here we're basically just simply saying, okay, the way to think about this from the lender's perspective, they're not getting all of your net operating income, okay? But what they can kind of say is, well, how much income do you have that the property is generating relative to the overall, you know, loan amount, okay? All right, so in this case, let's say the property, give me a dollar amount for the NOI.
300,000.
300,000, okay, is our annual NOI. All right, and the loan amount?
Not all at once. $1 million.
$1 million, whatever. Okay, probably a little bit low, but we'll go ahead and go with it. All right. So if we go with $1 million, then for the loan amount, then our debt yield is going to be what? 30%. Okay? Or another way of looking at it is that for this loan of $1 million, in essence, we technically have income that represents 30% of that. Okay? Now, as a lender, think about this before you answer. Would you prefer that debt yield to be high or low? Would you prefer the debt yield percentage to be high or low?
High.
High. Because the higher it is, that means you've got more income relative to the loan that you're borrowing, okay? So in this case, debt yields are usually good things, okay? They're not cost, they're yields, okay? That means they're income, they're, basically revenue. Does that make sense? Okay? So in this case, yeah, the higher this would be relative to the loan, that would be a good thing. Okay, moving forward. One topic down,
That's the whole thing?
that's it.
Oh my god, it's amazing. Yeah. 7 more.
Is that allowed, like, so the lender, it's totally his business to see what you're gonna be doing, what you're,
Yes,
right, so like a Starbucks is coming in, they can say, okay, you're gonna make a lot of money and we want to offset before we loan, before we.
no, it's not really what they're cut, they're gonna get whatever they, in terms of whatever loan conditions they put on the borrower. All they're really doing with this is simply saying, you are generating a lot of money as a Starbucks or whatever it is. We like that as a lender. That's a very, very good thing from our perspective as a lender. And so it's just another comfort.
It's not a negotiation thing in your lease?
Yeah, no, this is what,
This is just a
like,
metric?
yeah, a metric.
Okay.
Like, whenever you're going to get a loan, this is gonna be one of the many things that a lender is gonna look at.
Okay, not something that
Yeah.
they're requiring like the
Yeah,
reserve?
there's not gonna be any.
It's not a reserve?
Well, there may be a set number the lender has in mind for what this needs to be, but this is a less common metric than what we have been using, which is like debt service coverage ratio, which is more just common, okay?
Right, okay.
Show 'em.
All right. Moving forward. Okay? Another one is the interest coverage ratio. Okay? And this one is where you're going to have basically two variables. You're going to have your net operating income and you're going to have your annual interest payment. Okay? So if you got NOI of $50,000 and you've got an interest payment of $40,000, what do you think you're going to do?
Divide it.
Okay?
Wow.
And
Prolific stuff.
okay, 1.25. So once again, this is not that different than the debt service coverage ratio, which actually I think, now that comes up, no, actually we don't do that. Oh yeah, that is the next one, okay. Yeah, so, the debt service coverage ratio, which is the one that we have been using all along, is net operating income divided by annual debt service, okay? So how is this one different than this one?
That's the interest and that's the,
This one includes principal and interest. This one only includes interest, okay?
1.25 for interest coverage wouldn't be that good, right?
Not necessarily, because, depending on, once again, how much more, for example, it could very well be, that once again, if we've got an operating income of 50,000 and for that same loan, our total annual debt service, might be, I don't know, let's say 48,000, with that $8,000 difference being basically the principal portion. Well, in that circumstance, $1.04. Now, for that ratio, most lenders are going to say absolutely not, because that's only a 4% cushion. If something happens to your net operating income and it goes down ever so slightly, that's going to have a dramatic impact on your ability to be able to pay off that note. Now, here's the thing. This may not be relevant. And the reason it may not be relevant is, what if you have an interest-only loan? Then this will be relevant up here. Does that make sense? Because not all mortgages have to be amortizing mortgages. You know, you can have plenty of lenders that will say, yeah, we'll give you an interest-only mortgage, and therefore all that really matters is the interest expense. But if it is an interest-only mortgage, then technically your annual debt service would be the same because you're not paying down principal, it's just an interest-only mortgage. Okay, Chase?
So does amortization, just like to clarify the concept, that's basically just relates to the principal of a loan and kind of like I don't understand.
Yeah, yes,
I mean, I do it
yes.
obviously,
No, that's exactly what it means. Amortization means that in essence, you're allocating it over the life of the loan in some way. So the amortization, by definition, means are you equally allocating it over the life of the loan? Are you proportional to the amount that you owe allocating it over the life of the loan? Or, you know, some other approach, but you know, the two primary that we talked about were constant payment mortgage, which is the normal sort of mortgage, and that your amortization changes depending on how much you owe over the life of the loan, whereas like the constant amortization mortgage is your payment changes over time, but the amount that is amortized over time, the dollar amount of principal being amortized stays constant.
So how is it that they offer amortization periods longer than the loan term, or the term of the loan? Like why is that even, like why does that
Because they want you to refinance.
Gotcha.
They want to earn that extra money of refinancing, or they want you to potentially be subject to a new interest rate at the time of refinancing.
But it helps you though, right?
Yeah, it's also.
It can help you, it can hurt you. Because think of like, what would happen, and this has happened. I mean, it specifically happened like the 2007 sort of time frame, where a lot of loans were made, let's say in late 2000, let's just say 2005 would be a nice number. So 2005, you get a commercial loan on a commercial property. 5 years later, in 2010, what's the market like? Not so good, okay? So all of a sudden, you've got, I don't know why I'm answering this, Chase just left the room, he's the one that asked the question, but anyway, but the point is that at the end of 5 years, of that 5-year term, the value of the property maybe has gone down because you bought it and financed it in 2005. Now, 5 years later in 2010, the value of the property is down here. Now, you've paid off 5 years of maybe a 15-year mortgage, but you still owe maybe more on the property than what it's worth. Okay, so you go to refinance it after that 5-year term, and the lender says, I'm not going to be able to refinance it for what you basically owe on it or anywhere close to that. So you're now going to have to contribute more money into the property to have it refinanced. Does that make sense? Okay. So it doesn't always work out in your favor. Matter of fact, I remember, the reason I actually use that example, I remember vividly sitting in a restaurant in about 2010, and this is why I don't think you should ever talk business in a restaurant, because people are always listening to everything you say, whether you think they are or they're not, okay? Especially in a small town, okay? And so I'm sitting there in a restaurant, and you know, you can't help but overhear basically this guy was having lunch with his banker and was talking about all the properties that he had bought, in essence, in 2005 that were worth substantially less in 2010, and he was basically beginning to yell at his banker because he wasn't willing to refinance them, you know, at anywhere close to what basically they were originally financed at because the market value had gone down. And, you know, there's this whole thing unfolding at the dinner table next to me, you know, and listening to all of this. And of course, then I turn around and I actually knew who the guy was, and it was just like, you know, it's just, but yeah, never talk business at a, you know, it's just, I think it's a bad idea because everyone will hear you.
Yeah, you should have just offered to buy them out right there.
So, anyway, all right, moving forward. All right, everybody good with that?
So lots of shitload of money.
Yeah, well, it's a way to, I mean, in essence, because in terms of refinancing something like that, yeah, you're gonna have to contribute. Now you have a cash call that you've got to contribute into that deal, but you may not have that cash.
Most of the time not.
Right. Then you're gonna be forced to do what? Sell the properties Then you're forced to take a loss on the properties. Horrible situation.
Stuff in the nightmares.
Okay,
And wake up in cold sweat.
Get Freddy Krueger.
okay.
Debt loss.
So, how can we complicate this up a little bit? All right, in terms of some of the calculations. All right, so let's say that we have a property with a stabilized, actually let's do a new one just so that you don't be confused. Okay, so let's say that we've got a property with an NOI of $20,000. All right, and the lender is willing to basically make you a loan with a debt service coverage ratio of what? Give me a number.
1.25.
1.25 is what I'm hearing. Okay, so that means your annual debt service, maximum annual debt service, would be $16,000. Okay, now, what if I were to then say, all right, based on that annual debt service, the terms of the loan are going to be for how many years of a mortgage? Give me a term. Somewhere between 5 years and 30 years. 20. Okay? 20 years. Okay, what interest rate?
5.5.
7.5. Okay? Now, I might ask, okay, well, what would then be the maximum loan amount that you could get with those items given, assuming monthly payments? Okay, so we want you to solve for maximum loan amount, and then also we want you to solve for maximum purchase price, assuming what sort of loan to value ratio? Give me a percentage. 70? 70% loan to value. Okay, so you got two parts to this problem. Solve for the maximum loan amount. Whoops, I can spell. It's loan amount, not amount. Okay? Okay, work on it. Give you a couple minutes. Again, funky days. First person that gets it, give me a number. Has it yet? Andrew, you got something? Okay, well, let's just put it down. If it's wrong, you're going to be ostracized. Okay.
Is it loan amount 165,000?
Okay.
509.51.
Okay. And then what about the maximum purchase price?
236 for 142.15.
Okay. 230. I'm sorry. 236.
232 442.
Okay. 232. 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. 236
You're
442.
killing me here. Okay. Okay. One more time. 2, 3,
6
6,
442.
4, 4, 2. Okay. Let's see if you're right. Okay. Anybody else matching up with that?
No, I don't even know what you did. I literally put in like interest, like 7.5 in the interest, 20-year
Okay.
term. I got some like millions and the millions of dollars.
Okay. I'm not saying you're right. I'm not saying he's wrong.
Well, I'm wrong.
I'm saying here's where we
I
go.
trust Andrew.
All right, so first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take this annual debt service of 16,000. You're gonna divide that by 12 to get monthly debt service. That's gonna give you monthly debt service of $1,333.33.
What is it?
Looking good so far.
What?
Instead of looking good so far.
Okay,
The monthly debt service, you said?
this is the monthly debt service. This is the annual debt service. Okay? All right, so you've got your monthly debt service, which another way of looking at that is going to be your payment. Okay? Your term, 20 years. Your interest rate, 7.5%. And you're going to simply solve for present value to get your maximum loan amount. I get 165, 509, and we can round off the rest because it just depends on whether you put how far you carried out the decimals. Okay, if you didn't carry out the decimals and you only put it in as the 1333.33, then it actually ends up being like 09. Okay, so that's the only difference. Okay, then to get the maximum purchase price, you simply take that number divided by, in this case, the loan to value ratio of 0.7 or 70%. So maximum purchase price 236, 441, 56, or rounded 42. So yes, Andrew was correct. Woo! All right. So that makes sense, everybody? Yes or no?
So why are we doing the annual debt service? Because like,
Because that's the number that we get from doing our debt service coverage ratio calculation. We know what our net operating income is. We know what the debt service coverage ratio is. We have to solve for the annual debt service, and then we obviously have to use that to get to our monthly debt service or our monthly payment to then back solve into what is the loan amount, to then back solve into what is the maximum purchase price.
So what is the scenario that you're in to,
It's very simple. I mean, you know how much the property is generating in income, okay? $20,000 a year in net operating income, okay? You find a property out there that's for sale, you know that's generating that amount of net operating income after all the expenses have been paid, this is what you're left over with net operating income. You go to a lender, the lender says, hey, I'll make you a loan based on a 1.25 debt service coverage ratio. That means the lender says, okay, $16,000 a year is what I will allow you to put toward your mortgage payments, okay? So we need to figure out what that is on a monthly basis. That's $1,300 a month. The lender says to you, I'm willing to make you a loan for 20 years at 7.5%. That means the lender is basically saying, I'm willing to loan you $165,000, okay? And then you're saying, all right, if they're only willing to lend me up to 70% loan to value ratio, what is the most I can pay for this property? $236,000. So if the actual asking price on the property is $250,000, I'm probably not going to do this deal. But if the asking price is maybe $220,000, then yeah, it makes sense. Okay?
I don't know if you, I keep doing the present value. I know this is like nominal or marginal, but I don't get like 0.9 cents at the end. Like, does anybody else get that? Or?
Okay, and once again, it's due to rounding. It's a question of where you rounded or didn't round.
Oh, so how many 0.333?
Right.
Gotcha.
Okay? That does make a difference.
No, I understand. That's I just couldn't understand. I was like, am I down? Like, but I
Sometimes.
appreciate it. Yeah, it depends on the day.
Okay,
so
all right.
let me ask one more.
Okay, yep.
So is this something that's like, when you're shopping for interest rates, you're looking at this also as?
Yes,
as-
no, because that's a good point to
advertised
make.
fee?
Because let's say the lender down the street is willing to give you a 6.5% interest rate. What that's going to mean is that's going to mean a larger loan, and you being able to pay more for the property with a better interest rate.
So how far along in the process are you getting this,
You should have all, in other words,
at the begin, when you're in the shopping phase, you're getting this?
you should already have kind of a set of lenders that you're dealing with, so you have a ballpark idea of what the range is, okay? Realizing that each one of them has different conditions and preconditions and whatever, and your deal kind of has to fit what it is they're looking for, okay? Because, once again, lenders are retailers. They're all are just a little bit different what they're willing to lend on, okay? And what they're not willing to lend on, okay? And what conditions they may place upon you. So, as I'm saying, it's a moving target, you know, and it's not something that, you know, even over, you know, a couple of years is going to stay constant. It's like, you may go into a lender today and the lender says, yeah, we'll make you that loan. That sounds like a great deal. Perfect, you know, done deal. You go in next week and they say, sorry, we made too many loans, you know, this past, yeah, and we have basically no more money in essence to lend, or our board has met and says our portfolio is too heavily weighted toward one particular product type, one particular geographic market, whatever. And so, you know, so that's what I'm saying. It's not, you know, an absolute thing that you're going to go in every single time. They're going to like open arms and say, please come in, make a loan with us. In some cases, you know, they just aren't going to be interested. Okay, moving forward. All right.
And you're taking that 70%, you're gonna give that to us if it was asked? Or
Yeah, that's good.
giving 70%
Basically, yeah, the
loan to
70% loan to value, yeah, which I gave you up here.
value?
Yep. Okay. Okay, so that gets us through number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 9 and number 10. So now we got to get through 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right. All right, so the next one.
What topic was that last one? I'm sorry.
Debt service coverage ratio.
Oh.
Topic number 3. Okay. Fixed charges ratio. Okay. So with this one, what you've got is, in essence, fixed charges ratio is equal to your net operating income divided by basically the sum of all of your fixed charges. Now, what does that mean? And what are examples of fixed charges? Okay, so a typical example of fixed charges, it could be, so let me just write this down. Fixed charges could be, listen,
Ground rent.
okay, ground rent,
Operating lease payments,
I'm sorry.
operating lease payments,
I wouldn't think they would be operating leases, because these are going to be after basically your operating income. This is going to be more of debt related.
unsecured debt,
It could be like a second mortgage,
yeah.
which could be secured, not secured, okay? Also could be just simply the regular debt service on the loan. So those are at least 3 different examples. Now let's just take each of these, kind of talk about it just for a second. We talked a little bit about the whole ground rent thing based on what Cole had brought up, that if you have a property that, and we're gonna have a whole chapter dealing with ground leases and all that sort of stuff coming up, actually it's the last chapter in the book. Also, one more thing, I know I mentioned this at the very beginning, but I want to make sure that everybody understands, we do have class next Saturday, okay? All right? So, it's not a vacation next Saturday, the school is closed on Thursday and Friday, it is open again on Saturday, okay? Every year, we gotta go through this, all right? And it's in the syllabus. If you actually look at the syllabus, I actually wrote on the syllabus, yes, we have class on this Saturday, okay? All right, so getting back, ground rent. Ground rent is, in essence, like we were sort of talking about, where you, as the developer, may build a building on a piece of land that you don't own. You pay rent to the landowner for use of the land for some sort of extended, period of time, okay? And, what that period of time is, may vary. It could be, once again, you can do a ground lease or ground rent for, as little as a day, quite frankly, or as long as, hundreds or thousands of years. It really just kind of depends on what you choose to do. But as I sort of talked about earlier, it's the sort of thing that typically institutions and governments are probably the biggest users of sort of ground leases and charging ground rent, because they don't want to give up possession long-term, forever, of their land. That's what it all boils down to. Because they sort of look at it, we're happy for you to use our land, and use our land for the next 15, 20, 30, 50 years, but we don't want you to take, complete ownership and possession of that land forever, away from us. Does that make sense? Okay. A second mortgage, also called a junior mortgage, but this would be the case of where, all right, we go and we get a normal mortgage on the property, and then, for whatever reason, at some future date, we decide that we need to basically take out more debt on that property for whatever reason. Maybe we didn't do a good job of budgeting for future capital expenditures, like replacing a roof, replacing air conditioning systems, that sort of thing. So, in essence, we have to go maybe get a second mortgage or a junior mortgage on the property to maybe take care of those renovations or capital expenditures. Okay, does that make sense? And then finally, the normal debt service or mortgage payment on the property. So in essence, these fixed charges, kind of all bundled together, are in essence really the total debt, would be another way of sort of thinking about it, on the property. And so yes, the lender would want to know that relative to the total amount of income the property is generating. Does that make sense? Okay, so, okay, give me a fixed charge amount in terms of a dollar amount.
50 grand.
50 grand.
Can you renegotiate a ground lease after you put it in place?
Yes, but not usually during the lease. You can renegotiate it at the expiration of the lease.
Because, like, again, in the conversation that we had, he said that BC had did a ground lease on one of their huge CBD developments for 100 years. And, if after the improvements are there, I'm sure that the value of that it exponentially increases. So how would they judge what they're charging for the ground lease? Based on what they're going to build, or just like?
You're going to have to take into consideration the years to the expiration of the lease and whether or not it's a renewable lease. At what point can you renew it, and would know what the dollar amount associated with the renewal would be. So my point is, there's a lot of things that are going to go into that. Okay, this is why a lot of people stay away from ground leases. Is because of that fear of, number one, not being able to get it financed. Number two, of what it might be renegotiated to at some future date. But it's kind of like the whole thing of, let's say the university, says, okay, yeah, come in, build your new beautiful dorm on our property, pay us $1, in rent for that ground lease, and 20 years from now, yeah, the project becomes ours. Or we work out a deal to extend it from that point forward, but the university is not obligated to extend it. And so as you get closer and closer to that expiration date, then the developer begins to say, well, should I be really keeping this property maintained if I'm going to basically lose control of it in another year or two? And so those kind of issues have to be worked out as you get closer and closer to the expiration date. Plus, you have lenders that usually will only lend within five, well, okay, let me put it this way. If you have a 30-year ground lease, most lenders will say, we will only lend up to 25 years. Because they don't want to be a part of that last 5 years of messiness. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so just for fun, what's going to be our ground rent? Let's say 10 grand, 20 grand, and what does that leave us here? 20 grand, all right, for a total of the 50 grand. Okay? So those are our fixed charges, all right? So fixed charges, 50 grand, and let's say that our net operating income is 75 grand, then that means our fixed charges ratio $1.5. Okay? So all that we're saying there is, yeah, we have 50% more income than we do all of these fixed charges. I think most lenders would view that as being very favorable. Okay? Okay? Other questions?
Is it, you just take NOI divided by fixed charges?
Yes.
Fair.
You're gonna make it more difficult?
Yes.
No.
Not for me, but
Actually, it could be easier.
Right.
yeah, for everyone else.
Yeah, just for you.
It
A
needs
little
a
too
challenge.
complicated.
There, as I said, there was a method of my madness of covering the other stuff first. Because I figured, you know, now you're able to kind of post a little bit. Okay. All right, this next one will have a little bit more of a challenge to it. Not much, but a little bit. Okay. So this one on loan servicing and administrative fees. Now, if you remember, one of the things that I had talked about a while back was, you know, one of the several ways in which a lender makes money off of a mortgage. They make it off of the interest rate, the face interest rate on the mortgage. They make it off of loan origination fees. They make it off of prepayment penalties. And they also make it off of loan servicing or administrative fees, okay? So we never actually did a computation using the loan servicing fees. So let's just do one, all right? Start off with a loan, 12 payments per year. Clear everything out. Okay, give me a loan amount. 1.5 million. Okay, give me an interest rate.
5%.
5%. Okay, give me a term. It's kind of like a cheerleader's yell. Give me an interest rate, give me a term, give me. Okay, what is the term?
6 years.
How much?
6 years.
6 years.
15?
Where are you coming from? 6 years. All right. 6-year loan, okay. All right. All right. So, first thing we're going to do, calculate the payment.
Gotta mix it up a little.
Yeah, that mixes it up a little bit.
So it'd be a high payment.
High payment.
Yes, it is. Okay, 24,000. 157, 39.40. Okay. Now, how much on a monthly basis are we, as a lender, going to charge these wonderful folks to basically collect their monthly payment? You know, what I'm talking about here is get their payment in the mail, open up that envelope, take out that check, type in the dollar amount of the check into a system, post that to the system, you know, a lot of work. Okay, how much are we going to charge them for that each month?
$250.
Okay, sure, why not? $250 a month.
The going rate.
All right, so what we're going to do is, if this loan is held to maturity, meaning it's not paid off early, okay, then all you're really doing is you're basically adding whatever that administrative fee is to your payment. So in other words, in this case, we will be adding $250. Now, my question is make sure,
You change from
we didn't change the sign, yep. Okay, so probably go ahead and, yeah, do the change of sign. Then do plus 250, okay? Change the sign. Plus 250. Right.
Is there a way to store in this calculator?
There is the store and recall button that's like 4 rows, 1 across, and I can show you how to do that real quick. But all right, so you put that in plus 250. That gives us 24,407.
So if it comes at negative, okay, plus equals minus.
Okay. One, sorry.
No.
Okay. So now once you've got that, then we need to basically make it a negative again. So change the sign again. Or we could have avoided all that and just done minus 250, but I didn't want to do that because then people in their mind would be, why are you subtracting it? You know, no, so that's why we're doing the change sign, okay? All right, and then you're gonna put it in as the payment. All right, then all you're gonna have to do is solve for the interest rate and you're done.
So the only difference in this is we're adding a $250 fee to the payment.
Correct.
That's it.
So that means that our cost of borrowing went up from 5% to basically 5.36%. Make sense?
Only $250.
It seems like it would make it a lot less if you're only adding 250 to 24,000.
Well, but once again, keep in mind that the principal portion of that is going to be pretty big because it's a roughly short term. It's only 6 years. All because of you. Okay, all right. So everybody good with that? Does that make sense, everybody? So the whole thing behind the loan servicing and administrative fees, all that's really doing is, in essence, it's the equivalent of adding to your actual payment amount. Now, could we have shortened this process a little bit? Yes, because what we could have done is once we had solved this, if we had simply put in minus 250 because of not changing the sign, then that would have given us the answer, and then we just put in payment and avoided those two change of signs. But I didn't want to do that because, like I said, I don't want confusion, okay?
So you're saying the interest payment, the new interest payment is based on including the
Correct,
fee?
yes. Okay? Because the reality is you're making a higher dollar payment to the
So
lender.
it's not really 5%?
Right, correct. Are we good? Yes? Okay, refinancing. All right, so in this case, we're gonna do something relatively straightforward. All right. Loan amount, 800,000. Okay, interest rate,
It's just like popcorn pit people give you stuff. Some people are coasting on their contributions.
yes. Okay, term,
You tell them,
term,
10 years.
10 years.
Let's take the
Well, part of the reason I do this is because if I have all these pre-worked out problems, then you just sort of automatically assume that, you know, oh, well, he's just, you know, no, we're doing these as we go on purpose. So that if I screw up, well, you screw up.
All right. No, it's very similar that way of thinking.
Okay. So we get our payment. Let's see what it is. 84, 85, 24, okay? Everybody good? Okay. Now, that was our interest rate whenever we acquired the property. And let's say that a few years have passed, okay, since we acquired this property and interest rates have gone down. All right, so how many years have passed? 3 years. Okay. So 3 years passed since original loan. Okay, so that means for this loan, 7 years remaining. Okay?
So how do you pick 10?
Okay, now, so what that means is what we need to do is, in terms of this loan, we can do this a couple of different ways. Just make sure, see how I, so I make it as easy for you as possible. Okay. So what we're going to need to do is go ahead and get the loan balance. Okay. So what is the term of which we're going to get the loan balance for?
36.
36. See, love it. You guys are thinking. 3 years, 36 months. Okay, let's get our balance. Okay, do I match up?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we can continue on making payments of the 84, 85 at the 5% interest rate for the remaining, 7 years, or we go to the bank, we refinance this loan. So let's clear everything out first, just to be safe. Okay, clear everything out.
Refinancing the new balance.
We're refinancing the new balance, okay? So 600, 346, 39. And the term is now going to be for how many years? 7 years remaining.
Wouldn't you determine that a refinance?
Well, yeah, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to keep it simple for you. It could be we make the term a lot longer than the 7 years, but I'm trying to make it simple so it's apples to apples comparison. You'll see why. Okay? So we go to the bank, we refinance for the remaining 7 years. So all we're really trying to do is really get a change in interest rate. Okay? And so let's say the new interest rate, instead of being 5%, is what? Something lower than 5%.
4%.
4%.
Jackpot.
Boom. Okay, 4% is the new interest rate, so that means our new payment is going to be, wait for it. Excitement is just beyond comprehension. Okay. 820602 rounded. Okay? Okay, so now, old payment was 84, 85, 24. New payment, 820602. Difference, $279.22. Okay. No. For how many months?
7
No.
7 times,
So 84.
7 times 12 is 84. Okay, so 84 months remaining. 23,454.60 would be our total dollar savings. Make sense?
The 84-month remaining is just a 7-year period.
Correct. That's purposely why I chose to keep it the same as the original loan, because if we had made it a different amount, then we would have to it would make it much more complicated. Trust me. Because then we have time duration match the loans and we don't want to do that. All right. Moving forward. Almost there. Okay, 2 more calculations and then we can take a break and then take a quiz. All right. So one of the things we've talked about this, we've actually done some calculation, we're going to do a little bit different calculation.
This is really hard stuff. Is there a bonus on this?
Okay. So one of the things that we had talked about in the past, and we've done a calculation or two as it relates to loan origination fees or loan discount points. This is where, once again, at the beginning of the loan, the lender says, hey, we're going to charge you these fees to make this loan, and we're basically going to collect those fees from you at the beginning of the loan. And what we did previously was we basically said, okay, here's the loan amount, here's the term, here's the interest rate, here's the dollar amount of these loan origination fees or discount points, calculate the lender's yield. Okay, that's what we did previously. Okay, now what we're going to do, something a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and start with basically the same sort of setup, 12 payments per year. Pull everything out. Okay, give me the loan amount. 1.5 million. Okay, interest rate?
4%.
4%. Term?
10 years.
10 years. Okay, let's get our payment to start with. Okay, 15,186.77. Okay. So here's what we want to know. And this is why it's different than the one we had done like this on one of the previous quizzes. The lenders say to themselves, all right, instead of just saying I want some sort of discount point or loan origination fee associated with this in terms of a percentage, what I want to do is I want to achieve some sort of a yield off of this, okay? Currently, my yield with no discount points, no loan origination fees is 4%. But I want to get something higher than that, and I want to pick what that number is going to be. I want to pick a specific yield. So what yield do I want to get? Something higher than 4%. 4.5%. So, if we put in 4.5% as our interest rate, and then we solve for present value, let's see what happens. Okay, we technically get a new loan amount. What that means is if the original loan amount was $1,500,000, and this new loan amount with this new yield is 1,465,361.24. charge $34,638.76 in loan origination fees at the beginning of this loan to get the yield that we want to get of 4.5%. Does that make sense?
Can you explain like their point of view? So they gave out a 4% interest loan, but they charged you. Can you explain it again?
Okay. If you remember, with loan points, loan origination fees, what happens is, okay, they give you this loan, this is the loan. 1.5 million, 4%, 10 years, that's your monthly payment, okay? But what they say is, okay, after you've come to agreement on those conditions, then they basically are saying to you, all right, we've got you basically at the closing table. We need to charge you some basically fees for preparing all these documents and making you this loan, going through all the internal bank, you know, hoo-ha that you have to go through in order to get to the closing table. So what they're saying internally in the bank is we don't know what dollar amount we want to charge you. What we do know is what yield we want to achieve on this loan. So they're basically saying, all right, we want this guy, instead of really paying 4%, we really want him paying 4.5%. So what that means is we have to net only a $1.4 million sort of dispersal to the borrower, because they are going to, in essence, pay us up front $34,000 in fees. But yet, over the course of the loan, over the 10 years, if you remember, they're still paying us back the full 1.5 million, okay? But from the lender's perspective, they're only really dispersing a net of 1.4 million. In other words, if you remember the whole sort of timeline thing, what's really happening here.
But aren't they dispersing the 1.5 and then they're paying the 34?
No.
No, you're giving it up at closing.
The lender, okay, let's look at this at what's actually happening on a timeline. Okay, from the lender's perspective, at time period 0, they are dispersing $1,500,000. And then each month, starting in month 1, they are getting back $15,186.77 for 120 months. But simultaneous to that dispersal and to the acknowledgement that that's what they're going to be getting, they are receiving from the borrower $34,638.76, meaning the net result of what they're really dispersing is the $1,465,000.
So are they financing the 34,000 into the loan?
In essence,
but they're charging it like the fees.
yeah. So it's kind of it's a quirky thing, because the reality is you as the borrower, in one sense, are only really getting 1.465 million, but the reality is you owe 1.5 million. Now, they can choose to manipulate this in a whole variety of ways, but the net result is, from their perspective as the lender, their net dispersal is the 1.4 million. Okay?
Is that the difference when you see a loan sheet, you see 2 rates, you see the interest rate and then the APR?
Yes. Basically, the APR is the annual percentage rate, the real sort of cost of borrowing. Okay, and that factors in, or is supposed to factor in, all of these other extraneous charges, fees.
So don't even look. You have to look at the APR.
Right.
Not even thinking that.
Right.
Okay, so
What did you
just
say,
working
Paul?
it back.
You look at the APR. You're not even
So
looking at the freaking
you're
rate.
getting the payment per year, and then you're basically adding a 4.5% interest, because you're saying that there's a 5% origination points.
No, it's not. It's a 0.5%.
That's what I meant to say. I'm sorry, like 0.5%
Go
of
away, man.
points that are being added. So that's why, okay, this is really what you're getting, because they're adding those points upon originating the fee. and then you're subtracting the two, so really the solution is 34,000, that's representing the amount that.
You're being paid as a lender to make the loan.
Okay. Got it.
So it's your borrower's cost of
Yes,
buying the loan. But
Yes.
are you paying, is the bank's getting that at closing?
right.
And then you're paying it,
It's a wash. I mean, it's not a wash, but it's that once again, let's say I'm the lender, you're the borrower, okay? I am writing you a check, in essence, for 1.5 million.
right,
You, in turn, are instantly writing me a check back for 34,638,
right.
Who's,
That's
borrower.
money you have to bring to closing,
okay? Yeah,
right?
that would be the money you'd
It's
have,
not, you're not mortgaging that too, you're paying that at closing,
in essence, yes.
right?
So what are you asking here? What, are you looking for the new, like the loan amount, or are you gonna, like, are you asking for their net, like their net dispersal?
How much in fees do I have to
How much in
charge you?
fees or loan origination fees are they charging?
so you're paying, out of pocket you're paying that? That's all.
No, that's rolled into the
This is why
loan.
lenders make so much
No,
money.
Oh, it's
that's,
not?
On your
That's
closing
closing
statement,
costs.
what will happen is,
Yeah.
after everything is said and done, you think you were really getting a $1.5 million loan. In terms of you were really getting 1.5 million to actually finance the property with. You are not. You are getting 1,465,000, okay? You owe the bank 1.5 million, but you're really only getting at closing 1.4 million.
That's how much they're giving you.
Net, because once again, you're in essence really paying them back instantly
They
at
show,
closing.
they show you on paper,
Right.
$1.5 million loan.
Right,
Well, what, okay,
So they're making that closing cost.
yes.
so,
That's why it's hidden, you know, because you're thinking, you know, okay, well, this is just another closing cost, and it is another closing cost, but it's one that you just don't really think about because it's hidden in there with all of the other
So
stuff.
what you said, that's interest rate and that's APR,
Okay.
essentially?
Yep.
this is gonna make it a little complicated. So, if you're buying a property and the loan amount is 1.5 million, that's the total loan amount. And you go to the bank, you say, I would like to get a loan for 1.5 million. Realistically, they're gonna write it up, at that point, wouldn't they write it up as a, more so, they would write it like a 1.63 with the fee? 'Cause that's what on paper, I'm just trying.
You would have to bring this extra money to closing.
Yeah.
You have to bring the 34 to close.
Right.
you have to factor that in.
Or you simply don't take it at closing.
Oh, okay, or you could add it to the loan, I guess.
Right.
You could tell them, oh, we'll add the closing document. Oh, okay, I get it.
Okay, all right, moving on.
That's what.
Here's, this is, okay. Here's another way to, I mean, think about this. And I mean this in the best possible way. I mean, this is one of those things I probably have to put the camera on, but think about it like this. If smart people like you are having difficulty understanding how this works, and you're actually in a program that is focused to a certain extent on how this works, imagine the general populace that doesn't have a clue as to how this works, and that in essence are routinely being taken advantage of, and they don't even know they're being taken advantage of by the lenders with many of these fees and charges, and allowing the lenders to walk away with larger and larger rates of return. Because they can. Because no one really understands what it is they're doing. Do you follow me?
But it's allowed, so it's not really.
It's allowed.
It's not
Yeah.
misunderstood.
But it's like,
Can we negotiate?
Like if you go,
if you know what you're doing,
If you could say, I'm
but
not.
yet, even if you know what you're doing, doesn't mean that they're gonna budge from their process of what they do.
exactly.
And in many cases, a lot of these things don't fully emerge until you're at the closing table.
Oh, they don't even, they did.
You know, it's like, literally, they have submitted all of this stuff through the title company, and then you show up at closing and you're looking at your, you know, HUD statement or closing statement, you're like, what are all these other fees and charges and things, and you're just sort of scratching your head and like, where'd all this come from? But yet at that point, you're like, I
There's
have
not like a
already,
disclosure
I have
requirement?
already been through, well, yeah, you don't have to sign it, you can walk away.
Yeah.
But you've already been through all the brain damage of getting to that
When you're
point
in
of closing.
contract.
And the last thing on your mind is wanting to go back and have to repeat that process all over again.
That just
Now,
sounds
in
like
some,
so unethical.
now, in some cases, they will provide you with those closing statements, maybe, 24 hours, 48 hours, or something before the closing occurs. But even with, a couple of days' notice, that still is not, like, you're not gonna probably go through or want to go through all of that brain damage all over again, just to get to that point again 60 days later. But what you should do on the front end is whenever you're actually talking with the lender and they're telling you your interest rate is 4% or whatever it is, you should be asking the question of, are there any origination fees? Are there any servicing fees? Are there any prepayment penalties? Are there any other charges? Give me a sample of a typical sort of closing statement for this kind of loan, so I have an idea of what to sort of look for. And in some cases, they will. In some cases, they'll say, we don't really have a typical standard sort of thing, but here's in general kind of what we do. Question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If I talk long enough, I usually do. All right, moving forward. Okay, so this is the last one, and then we take our little quiz.
Quizzy?
Another quiz.
Quizzle.
Quizzle. All right.
Sounds like a
Some are very different concepts to grasp.
Okay, so give me, and this is specifically loan-to-value ratio calculations. All right, in this case, give me a monthly payment. Switching it up a little bit.
$1,500.
$1,500 monthly payment.
Pesos.
What'd you say?
You said dollars, you said pesos.
Oh, pesos.
Yes.
Converted, now you can convert it.
Yeah.
4 to 1.
Yeah, that would be a very, very small mortgage payment with pesos, yes. Very small. Like almost about a penny or something. Okay. Okay, what sort of interest rate?
4.5.
4.5. All right, and what sort of term? How many years? 15 years? Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to solve for basically the loan amount to start with. All right, so once again, make sure your cover is set on 12 payments per year. All right, so let's start with that. Okay, so this would be our loan amount, okay? Now, in this case, let's say the lender were to say, okay, we're willing to loan you a certain loan-to-value ratio. Give me the loan-to-value ratio they're willing to lend.
70 to 30?
Huh? Oh, so okay, 70% loan-to-value, okay. 70% loan-to-value, all right? So that would mean, in order to figure out what the total value of the property would be, you just simply do what?
Multiply it.
Divide, multiply, divide by.
Okay, just go.
Chase, you said earlier something about, questioning your intelligence, and I don't even wonder. 0.7. Okay. So 196, 080, 15, divided by 0.7. 280. Okay. So that would be
Property price.
the property
Purchase price.
value or purchase price. max purchase price. So somewhat similar to one of the previous problems, but nonetheless trying to continue to reinforce the concept. Loan to value ratios. Part of what I hope you're seeing in some of these calculations is you attack them from different directions, okay? Depending on what information you have, you know, depending on what the scenario is, okay? So, you know, in this one, we're simply saying, okay, maybe we can afford a monthly payment of $1,500 at the interest rate that the lender offers at 4.5% for 15 years. So the most they're gonna lend us is the $196,000. And then we know that from that, if they're only willing to go with a 70% loan to value ratio, then the max that we can pay for the property is the $280, $114.50, okay?
We're done.
Yes, we did, something similar, okay? All right, are we good? Okay, take a 5-minute break, come back, and we'll do a little quiz.
So we just,
Don't get out early.
you just find the present value and then
This is my rapper now.
multiply by the relative value,
I don't think anything stupid. I
Not
was watching
multiply.
for you, and just like,
That's
by
not divide
the time you asked, I forgot you even had it.
You multiply to your wrong answer.
Well, I'll probably make one little tiny mistake on every single test. It's like,
I just sent you my joke back.
we always spot it.
Look what I just sent you. That's so my joke made no fucking sense.
Legit.
Are we not, there's not gonna be any questions in regards to this on it? On the case?
Questions 9 and 10.
Questions 9 and 10 are these?
Yep.
Okay.
Sure.